Your generous support makes this ministry possible. Thank you.
Deuteronomy chapter 22. You know, we have here a collection, 22, 23, on into 24. We have collections of laws that appear to not really have a unifying theme. I'm going to propose one. Other commentators propose a unifying theme, but it's difficult sometimes to link all of these together. We're going to do our best. I would say this. We're in the middle of the section of Deuteronomy where people, this is what they think of when they think of the book of Deuteronomy. Laws about inane and specific things about Israel's life that, do they really apply to today? Who knows, right? But some of these apply really well, and not just to our culture. Remember that when we talked about interpreting this book, we said that there are times where we have to cross a river to get to our day and age, and sometimes, hermeneutically, it's a big jump. Sometimes that jump is really big. Other times, however, we said the jump is really small. Don't murder. Small jump. It's not a jump at all. Just don't do it. Don't murder. That really applies well. The unloved wife, we look at and say, wow, that's a huge jump. In our culture, that's way out here. Huge jump to get there. How does that apply to today? I don't have 2 wives. Step outside of your American culture for a moment and just recognize that in many other parts of the world, they would look at that injunction and say, oh, that's a teeny little jump. Why? Because I have 3 wives. And so somebody in Southern Africa or in other parts of the world are going to look at a text like this and say, yeah, this applies tomorrow. This applies immediately because yeah, I have 2, and I don't really like one. So the text of Deuteronomy, it's fascinating to me that the Bible is transcultural in that sense. And some parts that don't apply to us really apply to Christians in other parts of the world. And we're going to see some of these things today in this text. Deuteronomy chapter 22, some commentators, I would agree with them, would link a bunch of these commands under the title preservation of life. Some of them fit there more easily than others, and we'll just make our way through. Deuteronomy 22, verse 1, you shall not see your countryman's ox or his sheep straying away and pay no attention to them. You shall certainly bring them back to your countryman. If your countryman is not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it home to your house. It shall remain with you until your countryman looks for it. Then you shall restore it to him. Thus you shall do with his donkey, with his garment, or with anything lost by your countryman, which he has lost, and you have found. You are not allowed to neglect them. You shall not see your countryman's donkey or his ox fallen down on the way, and pay no attention to them. Certainly help him to raise them up. In the ancient Near East, these sorts of animals would have been valuable possessions. Somebody's livelihood would depend on having an animal like an ox or a donkey to plow a field with, to haul their goods to market, to bring in their harvest, to thresh out their harvest. These would have been very valuable. The loss of that kind of possession could have meant harm to the family, could have meant the inability to provide for themselves, might have meant they go into an impoverished state. And so, notice 2 things. First of all, this man loses his possession, and you, that is, fellow Israelite, have a responsibility to make sure he gets it back. And this is an early Good Samaritan situation, right? You are not allowed to just stand by and watch this animal wander off and perhaps die, because now it wanders into a place where it can't take care of itself, has no one to look out for it. It gets eaten by a wild animal. You're not allowed to just let it go. The Israelite is commanded to have concern for his neighbor by taking care of that animal. So the Israelite is commanded, this is going to cost you something. Now I've got to bring your animal to my house. and do what with it? Care for it and feed it, water it. Now I'm expending labor for a possession that I'm not going to reap any benefit from. We've seen this sort of ethic before in the issue with lending money or lending money in advance of the year of Jubilee, where Israelites are commanded to sacrifice for themselves, sacrifice some of their own possessions for the interest of someone else. And we see it again here. That animal might be found out in the field. Notice you can't take it either, right? You can't say, finders, keepers, I found your ox, now it's mine. Nor can you just neglect it. You have to bring it home, take care of it. The end of verse 3, you are not allowed to neglect them. In addition, if you see your countryman's donkey or his ox fallen on the way, you're not allowed to just ignore it. In this case, perhaps the situation envisioned is an animal is carrying a burden and it's fallen down under its burden, right? And so you have the statement at the end, you shall certainly help him to raise them up. So this animal is carrying a burden. Maybe it's goods to market, maybe it's harvest from the field, and for some reason the animal falls down under its burden and he can't get up again. And the man who owns this thing is by himself. You're not allowed to just wave and see you later and go on the way. You've got to help that man get his animal up and get him to his next location. Notice, it's going to cost you again. You're going to be delayed. And the interest here, I think, is in the preservation of that animal and also in the preservation of your countryman's life, in as much as he might lose that possession and be at a significant disadvantage. Don't link this to stopping and picking up hitchhikers, okay? Ladies, this does not mean that the next time you see a guy on the side of the road with a flat tire, you have to stop. But it can mean that what do you have to do? Maybe you should take an effort to call 911 or call somebody to help. Or if you're a man and you are in a position to help, fair enough. But we're not bound countryman to countryman the same way the Israelites are. But nevertheless, as we cross over the river, there is a sense that we should have concern for our fellow neighbor. We should have concern. When we lived in Texas, the woman that lived next door to us was not well in her mind. Literally, she was. Well, we called her Crazy Judy. And she was crazy. And one day the police came to her door, tried to find her, and she was running away from them for no apparent reason. And eventually one day, we got a call at 2 a.m. Hey, can you come pick me up? Like, Judy, where have you been? We haven't seen you in a month. Oh, I just got out of the hospital. It was a psych hospital. A month ago. Well, where have you been? We heard you got out, but, well, I met somebody in there, another lady, and she needed help, so I moved in to help her. Well, a crazy lady, met another crazy lady in the hospital, and now they both got let out on the same day, and she moved in. And now, after a month, this woman had kicked Judy out, and she's out on the curb with all her bags. Can you come pick me up? You know, I didn't want to. The bottom line is you don't want to. And the only reason you do something like that is for the name of Christ and to say, okay, here's my countryman down on the side of the road. I'm going to go help her. So we go pick up all this stuff. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, throwing all this stuff in the back of the car. She gets in, and she has this bag on her lap, and the bag starts moving. I'm like, Judy, what's in that bag? She said, oh, I found this cat by the side of the road too, and I'm bringing this one home as well. I'm like, you can barely take care of yourself. You moved in to try to take care of someone else, and now you're going to bring this animal home, and you're not going to take care of that either? Listen, at that moment, you don't want to help anybody. I think a command like this motivates. Yeah, you know, this is another person. It's a neighbor. And this person is down. And it's not an animal we're taking care of here. It's the person himself, herself. And the command there is to consider myself in solidarity with this person and help. It's not permissible to just walk on by. If it applies to an oxen, certainly it applies to an individual. It applies to an individual. The next verse comes out of nowhere. Verse 5, a woman shall not wear man's clothing, nor shall a man put on woman's clothing, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. I'll confess, I find it difficult to fit this one into the theme of preservation of life, except to say, God hates this, don't do it, because the life you're going to preserve is your own, because God will get you. He hates this. This is an abomination to the Lord. I don't think this is an injunction against shopping at the Gap, which often has unisex clothing, and the styles that fit men are very similar to the ones. And I don't think this is a case of a woman saying, you know, those jeans never fit, but guys' jeans fit, and I'll wear those. I think this is a case of a man or a woman presenting themselves as a member of the opposite gender. So this would be an injunction against transvestism, not just, you know, it's cold, can I wear your jacket? No, I can't, because that's a man's jacket. That's not what we're talking about here. I think what we're talking about is men passing themselves off as women and women passing themselves off as men. This is an abomination to the Lord. It's an abomination. There's not much more to say about that. It applies to our society? Yeah, it really does, because we have this. This is a growing phenomena in Western culture, and our response, I think, ought to be a biblical one, and that is, it's not that far across. Don't pass yourself off as a member of the opposite gender. Verse 6, 7, again, back to the theme of preservation of life. If you happen to come upon a bird's nest along the way, in any tree or on the ground, or with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, don't take the mother with the young. You shall certainly let the mother go, but the young you can take for yourself, in order that it may be well with you and that you may prolong your days. Verse 8, when you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you will not bring blood guilt on your house if someone falls from it. So in two cases, we're trying to preserve life. In the first one, this mother is sitting on the nest. If you take the mother and the egg or the young, you soon will have no more birds. And so this really is a case of conservation. Again, the tribe that Julie grew up near, they had a habit of eating caterpillars. Bad habit. Don't eat the caterpillars. They had a worse habit of when they harvested the I mean, how do you get caterpillars out of a tree? What's the best way to get caterpillars out of a tree? Cut the tree down. I mean, that makes sense, right? And next year when you go to find more caterpillars, oh, wait. There won't be any more because you cut all the trees down. So this was their practice. It was not very smart, but that's the way they sort of did things. I find this verse would apply very nicely. Don't take the bird and the young. Take the young. Leave the mother. You'll have more, and you will preserve life that way. The same thing with building a new house on a parapet. This one crosses over. The jump is a little bigger because I guarantee you there's not going to be anybody walking on my roof, because it's a roof that looks like that. So don't walk on that roof. But we looked at a house a week ago, and we noticed from the Google Earth picture that they have a pool. And there was a fence around that pool. And it's law in this country to have fences around pools. Why? Because people walk into them and they drown. Kids walk into them and they drown. Animals fall in and they drown. And so, although you might not need to put a fence around the roof of your house, the principle is be concerned to protect people from unnecessary injury to themselves. It's your responsibility. Another principle, it's principalized in our legal system, is you have to shovel the snow off your front steps and off your sidewalk in front of your house. If you fall on my sidewalk, I'm responsible. So it should be my duty to care for everyone else, watch out for them by shoveling that snow to protect life. Verses 9, 10, 11, 12, these verses illustrate a different theme, and that would be purity in the nation. These, again, are some of the more famous laws in the book of Deuteronomy that appear to not matter in our culture at all. I'm going to say we should extract the principle, and the principle is purity. Verse 9, you shall not sow your vineyards with two kinds of seed, or all the produce of the seed which you have sown, and the increase of the vineyard will become defiled. Verse 10, you shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. Verse 11, you shall not wear a material mixed of wool and linen together. Verse 12, you shall make for yourself tassels on the four corners of your garment with which you cover yourself. These are strange. I'm not a farmer, but I understand that, listen, you don't plow, you're not mixing your seed as you plow, as you plant your seed. At the same time, the injunction here seems to be God is commanding Israel to not do these things for a reason. And the reason is not necessarily specified. That is, you won't have as nice grapes if you plant two different kinds of seed. Or it won't be as comfortable if you wear wool and linen mixed together. Those don't seem to be the reasons. The reason seems to be, at the end of verse 9, the vineyard will become defiled. What does that mean? The vineyard will become defiled. In the context where we're at, I think the issue is that God intends for Israel to have illustrations of their national purity. That is, God wants Israel to understand that they are supposed to be a holy nation, a pure nation, separate. Are there opportunities for them to mix? Yeah, right? The Canaanites are there. People are going to be left in the land. They're going to be tempted to mix theologically. They're going to be tempted to mix culturally. They're going to be tempted to lose their purity. And he gives them some examples that will remind them over and over again that no, we're supposed to be a pure nation. The issue here is pedagogy. God's trying to teach them something by giving them these things to do. These behaviors that they're going to do every year or every day, or the tassels that they're going to see on the hems of their garment, are supposed to remind them, oh yeah, I'm separate, I'm pure. You know, sometimes people do that today. They wear shirts, or they hang a cross on their neck, or some of them give themselves Christian tattoos, and they say, look, this is going to remind me. It's going to remind me, oh yeah, I am this new person. When I was on the swim team in college, one of the guys had sort of gone off the deep end and come back. Caleb. He went off the deep end and came back, and to sort of commemorate that he was back, he had tattooed on his shoulder a starburst that said new and improved. And you know, that was his way of reminding himself, okay, I am this new person. I'm not that. And I don't think he was a believer. He just was trying to change his life. I'm not that person I used to be. I see some of these signs in a similar way. When I plow a certain way, it sure would be nice to plow with the ox and the donkey. That's all I have. Let's go. No, I can't do that because God said. And we could make a case for it's hard for the animal, for the ox to plow with a donkey. An ox is bigger than a donkey. It's not fair to the animals to do. The text just doesn't say that. I think the issue more is to focus on the purity. Don't wear a material of mixed wool and linen together. Well, I'd love to do that, but I won't. Okay, God commanded me not to do that. It's a reminder to be pure. These tassels, they get in the way, but God commanded me to put them on the hems of my garment. And every time I look down, I remember, oh yeah, there are those tassels. And the theme of remembrance is big in Deuteronomy. We've seen that already. Remember what God did for you in the past. Let that inspire your faith and motivate you for what's going to happen in the future. Now we have some more practical examples. As we cross that river, some of these, I don't think these are verses against genetically modified corn seed. I don't think that's and I don't think this is a verse that reminds us, don't wear a poly cotton blend, right? That's not, half of you are wearing t-shirts, and they're usually 60% plastic and 50% cotton or whatever. 10% extra unknown products in there, right? 110% weave. You get more for your money that way. I don't think that it's a command against that. But you know what we can do? We can say, as we come over, that we have to remember, and God has given us things to remember, that we're to be a pure and holy people too. Among them, things as simple as celebrating the Lord's Supper every week and reminding ourselves that Christ died on our behalf to purify us from all these things. And so I don't think we're going to pull the specific details about plowing, and you can't plow your field with a John Deere and a Ford tractor at the same time. You can't do that, right? That's not the point. The point is we should be a pure people too, and We should engage in the behaviors that God has commanded us and designed for us to remember so that we will be pure. These laws, the mixed clothing, shows up again in Leviticus, or showed up earlier in Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19, we read, "You are to keep my statutes. You shall not breed together two kinds of your cattle. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment upon you of two kinds of mixed materials." And it's in the context of being pure. The tassel shows up in Numbers 15, verses 37 through 41. Numbers 15, 37 through 41. "The Lord also spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, tell them they shall make for themselves tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and they shall put on the tassel of each corner a cord of blue, and it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, so as to do them and not follow after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you played the harlot, so that you may remember to do all my commandments and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God." When Moses commands this in Deuteronomy, he presumes that everybody knows about what happened in Numbers. And so these tassels are to be a constant reminder. A constant reminder. When you look down, when you see them on somebody else, oh yeah, don't do what I want to do. Do what the Lord commanded. Some of you sort of do this in your own lives. You paste sticky notes on your mirrors and on your cars, and you write verses on your hands, and you make notes in different places. That's good. That's good. It's a reminder that we're supposed to be a holy people doing what the Lord wants, not what we want. In the next section, we move into another issue of purity as it relates. This time it's sexual purity. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scenarios that are kind of, they're just reality. And God's going to regulate these issues. Number 1, verse 22, 13 through 21. This situation where a man marries a woman and then doesn't like her. 22, verse 22, man and a woman commit adultery. 22, 23 to 24, man sleeps with an engaged woman. This is the sketchy day. 22, 25 through 27, man rapes an engaged woman. 22, 28 through 29, man rapes a non-engaged woman. And then 22, verse 30, you can't marry your stepmother. No kidding. Number 1, notice, these things must have been happening. Therefore, the Lord has to come in and regulate this, issue commands about this. Number 2, you may not, maybe you don't think these things happen a lot today. These things happen all over the place. It's not new, it's ancient. Paul has to tell them in the book in Corinthians, hey, there are sins among you that are not even known among the Gentiles. A man has his father's wife. He's married or sleeping with his stepmother. So they obviously carry out through human history. 22, verse 13, if a man takes a wife, goes into her, and then turns against her, and charges her with shameful deeds, and publicly defames her, and says, I took this woman, but when I came near her, I did not find her a virgin, then the girl's father and her mother shall take and bring out the evidence of the girl's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate. The girl's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man for a wife. And then he turned against her, and behold, he has charged her with shameful deeds, saying, I did not find your daughter a virgin. But this is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. They shall spread the garment before the elders of the city. So the elders of that city shall take the man and chastise him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, and give it to the girl's father, because he publicly defamed the Virgin of Israel. She shall remain his wife. He cannot divorce her all his days. Listen. The point here is to protect this woman's life and to protect this woman's honor and the family honor. This man is being a rogue. The assumption is he doesn't like her anymore and is using as a pretense. He just wants to get rid of her. He married her and decided, oh no, I made a bad choice. I rushed into this. Or she turned out I don't like her anymore. For whatever reason, he is apparently, in this situation that's envisioned, making up this story. You know what? She was not a virgin when I married her. That may not strike modern-day Americans as big a deal as it used to, but in the ancient Near East, it was a big deal, as we're going to see in the next few verses. What's supposed to happen? She has to prove that she was pure. And so they're going to bring this bed sheet out, upon which they're supposed to find some evidence of blood or some evidence of that fact that when he first went into her, she was a virgin. If that can't be produced, then she's the one that's lying. But if it can be produced, that's going to be made visible, then the man is a liar. He can't get rid of that wife. He has to keep her. Now, I know what you're saying. You're sitting there saying, but he doesn't want her. And he has to keep her? That's tough. Yeah, but it's not as tough as being cast out as a woman of ill repute in that society. That would have been worse. So he has to stay with her. He has to provide for her. He can't divorce her for their whole marriage, their whole life. There are cultures that still do this. My Lebanese friend says that in the hill countries in Lebanon, they still go get that garment, that bed sheet, and they hold that thing. And I heard on NPR that somebody in Egypt, they're now selling a product that will simulate that blood from the first sexual encounter, because Egyptian society is sort of becoming more liberalized and women are engaging in these behaviors before they're married, but Egyptian men are still very conservative and they want a virgin. And so the idea is this woman can buy this device and it will release a fluid that looks kind of, and she can fake her husband out because his parents want that garment. They're still looking for that to prove she was a virgin. I mean, this is still a big deal in some parts of the world. So the point is, this issue of purity in this passage here, I think, notice it's designed to protect the woman. This is a protection. It's a protection against false charges brought by a husband who just doesn't want his wife anymore, that new wife. What happens? He gets fined. He's got to keep his wife all his days. Now, however, on the other side, verse 20, if the charge is found to be true and that girl was not a virgin, they shall bring out the girl to the doorway of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death. She has committed an act of folly in Israel by playing the harlot in her father's house. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. Listen, she didn't play the evil from among herself by herself, right? I mean, it takes two to tango. And unfortunately, the text doesn't say what you should do with the guy. I think the assumption is we don't know who it is, and she didn't give him up. So this daughter is found. It turns out she was not a virgin, and obviously she was having illicit relations before she got married, and the penalty is death. That's huge. And again, it's pedagogical. You shall purge the evil from among you. The point is, this is going to spread, and you've got to get this out. This sounds very similar to the punishment brought upon that wayward son or daughter. And it's harsh. As we cross the river, I don't think we say, okay, we bring this in. Anybody who's ever been in that situation, we stone you, or we ostracize you, or we kick you out. But I do think we say, notice, God really doesn't like this. And in the New Testament, we don't have the same punishment, but don't think for a moment that God's attitude towards that behavior has changed. It's becoming more and more acceptable in our culture for couples, even Christian couples, to cohabit before they get married. God doesn't like it. Don't take this text and say, oh, the penalty is so harsh, just get rid of the whole thing. No. Okay, the penalty goes, but the principle stays. God considered this worthy of death. He really doesn't like that behavior. Sexual purity really really matters. What happens then if men and women commit adultery? Verse 22, if a man is found lying with a married woman, both of them die. The man who laid with the woman and the woman purge the evil from Israel. There you go. Both parties get it. And I think if they caught that young man who was with that virgin, the same thing would happen to him. If there is a girl who is a virgin engaged to a man, and another man finds her in the city and lies with her, you shall bring them both out to the gate of the city. You shall stone them to death, both of them. The girl, because she did not cry out in the city, and the man, because he has violated his neighbor's wife. Purge the evil from Israel. In this case, remember, engagement, a little more permanent than engagement is today. Today, people break an engagement. There's a little social stigma. It goes away pretty soon. Not in that day. Engagement, you're married. It's just a matter of time before you cohabit, but you're married. So in this case, the situation is this man finds this woman. Notice the assumption is she didn't cry out. And it appears to me that Deuteronomy takes this as a consensual act. Because she didn't cry out, it's consensual. The two of them, they both die. But if in the field, verse 25, the man finds the girl who is engaged, and the man forces her, notice different language, he forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lies with her shall die. Don't do anything to the girl. There's no sin in the girl worthy of death. For just as a man rises against his neighbor and murders him, so is this case. He found her in the field. The engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her. So in one case, it's consensual. In the other case, it's not. And she doesn't bear the penalty. He bears the penalty alone. They were out in a field. She screamed and yelled. There was nobody out there to save her. And this thing happened to her. She shouldn't be made to pay an additional penalty. However, verse 28, if a man finds a girl who is a virgin who is not engaged and seizes her and lies with her and they are discovered, then the man who lay with her shall give the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall become his wife because he has violated her. He cannot divorce her all his days. That one really strikes people as oppressive and insane. This girl got raped, and now she has to marry the person who raped her? Ouch. That's not a situation that appeals to us today. Part of this is cultural. Recognize that in that culture of the day, no one would have wanted to marry her, right? She would have been found not to be a virgin. To be a little crass, she is damaged goods at that point. And so, sort of like breaking something in the shop, you break it, you own it. This guy is the one who did this. Now, he has to take the responsibility for her. And so he has to care for her and provide for her. And I know in our culture we think, oh, but there will be no love in that marriage. Okay, fair enough. Be careful that American culture has magnified this love way more than perhaps other people would have. She might be thinking to herself, and her father is thinking, somebody's going to provide for her. She's now going to be taken care of for the rest of her life because he did this thing, which is better than being cast off and effectively untouchable by anybody else who might take care of her. One more. Verse 30, a man shall not take his father's wife so that he will not uncover his father's skirt. That is, the privacy that is his father is entitled to belongs to his father and his wife alone. If you marry your father's wife, ostensibly your stepmother, you are infringing on intimacy that you're not supposed to have. It's an example of sexual impurity. And so these things, I've said that they're regulated. In some cases they're regulated. In other cases they're just commanded, don't do this. I would hardly say that a stoning is a regulation. It's a prohibition. You do this and you get caught, you're going to lose your life. God cares about sexual purity. There are other sexual deviations that could be listed. They're not all listed, but these are. And I think they're sufficient to illustrate God cares about purity, sexual purity. There are going to be other illustrations of purity as we move into chapter 23, but these are some powerful ones. Now remember, again, crossing this bridge, we live in a culture that is soaked in sexual immorality. I mean, you can't hardly turn on a TV or watch a movie or read a magazine without some appeal made to the sense of sexuality in the viewer. It's incredible. That's not new. That's ancient too. We've just gotten better at it. Better and better and better at it. And so what it reminds us of is that although some of these penalties might appear to make these laws stand far apart from us, in reality the principle is very close. Very close. Sexual purity ought to characterize God's people. It should have characterized God's people in ancient times, and it should characterize God's people today. No matter what your friends say, no matter what your Christian friends say, there's one thing you can be sure of. Sexual purity ought to characterize God's people, right? What's the will of God? Sexual purity as it relates to his own people.